Stephanie, if you gave me $100,000 bonus, I wouldn't go back.
Now there's protests erupting in the streets because of this unfortunate event. Tara, do you think this is going to be another repeat of the whole George Floyd protests that went the whole summer of 2020? I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Weird Wednesday. So we all know that crime is out of control across the country, and we could probably talk for 6 hours if we wanted to give an update on just crime in general. So in the interest of time, we've decided we're going to focus on one of the most significant areas where violent crime is out of control, and that's on public transportation, especially in metro stations and buses in blue cities. So recently, I read some very interesting articles, and I'm going to talk about Los Angeles first because I have a personal connection to that since I grew up there and I worked for the LAPD for many years. So in Los Angeles, the metro system is basically overrun by homeless people, drugs, crime, and I saw a lot of this firsthand as a police officer because I used to work shifts at the Metro Rail. And we were supposed to ride the trains and basically be high visibility presence to deter crime. And inevitably, every shift, there were multiple calls where you would have people complaining about homeless people harassing passengers, people being passed out on drugs in the train or in one of the bathrooms at the train station. There was always people vandalizing the train property and committing violent crimes. And I left LAPD in 2018, and that was before drugs were decriminalized. So I know it's gotten way worse since then. So back in March, the city of Los Angeles decided to launch a Metro Ambassador pilot program because they wanted to replace law enforcement officers on the Metro Rail with these unarmed, quote, ambassadors as part of their reimagined approach to public safety. And in a tweet in early March, the Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority wrote, quote, "Metro ambassadors are teams of friendly, uniformed professionals ready to help you navigate the metro system. They've been extensively trained and work with our cleaning, maintenance, and security teams. You told Metro you wanted more unarmed staff, and we heard you. The Metro ambassadors are part of a multi-layered team working to make transit safer, cleaner, and more comfortable to ride." So initially, they had 300 unarmed ambassadors deployed on the metro system, and their job was just to welcome people onto the train and answer questions and help them with resources or reporting problems. They don't do any enforcement, so it's basically like mall security, which, let's be honest, no criminal, no matter how low level, is going to have any respect for a uniformed ambassador that can't do shit to enforce the law. And so, as can be expected, this move obviously resulted in even more crime on the Metro Rail, with a rise in assaults on the train against both passengers and also on the buses against bus drivers. And so now people are more scared than ever to ride transportation, public transportation. So by the end of the month, when this thing was first initiated, the program was clearly a failure, so the city added another 48 ambassadors to their original 300, and now over half of them are armed. So this past April, there were 4 stabbings on metro trains in Los Angeles, one that resulted in a man dying. There was an article in News Nation a couple months ago that reported that as of March, at least 22 people have died on public transportation in Los Angeles from suspected drug overdoses, which is more than the total 21 individuals who died due to various causes in all of 2022. According to an article that was in the Epic Times this past April, the end of April, crime on the metro system over the past year in Los Angeles has increased by 21%. And during the past 12 months, the Metro Transit Authority has recorded 152 assaults on bus drivers alone. So according to the MTA, serious crimes, including aggravated assault, murder, and rape on LA County trains and buses increased by 24% in 2022 compared to 2021, and less violent crimes like drug use, weapons violations, and sex offenses increased by 37% from 83 to 114, including 14 incidents of sexual battery. And Metro further reported that escalating drug use, I laugh because this is such a ridiculous statistic. Escalating drug use on public transportation resulted in a 900% increase in drug incidents.
Wow, that's got to be like a record.
Yeah, and this is the shit that's being reported, right? And I can tell you from my own experience that a lot of crime reports don't even get taken, especially on public transportation. People get tired of waiting for the cops to show up to take the report, or they're on the metro system because they need to get somewhere, so they leave, or they're too scared to report what happened, or they just don't want to waste their time. And so these statistics are being reported with a significant increase of crime. These are happening while ridership is at an all-time low. And the LA Metro system has lost 41% of its riders since the start of 2020. And you can blame this on the pandemic. But even after the pandemic, a lot of people who used to ride public transportation say they won't come back because they're too scared to ride the train and risk getting assaulted by a mentally ill homeless person on drugs. And this is particularly true for women. In 2019, 53% of Metro riders were female. In 2022, that number dropped to 46%. And the Metro put out a survey last October, and the top reasons that females didn't want to ride the train had nothing to do with post-COVID issues. It had to do with crime and sexual harassment. And in that News Nation article I referred to earlier from March, there was an interview with an 83-year-old man named George Garrett, and he rides the train in Los Angeles every day. And he stated, quote, "It's a war. It's a war on the train. It's a free-for-all. They live on the train and they die on the train. There is no supervision whatsoever." And again, I've seen this firsthand, so I know it to be true. And apparently a few weeks ago, the former sheriff of LA County, Alex Villanueva, he decided to ride the train and talk with passengers. And of course, he saw that passengers were literally like smoking weed in front of little kids with their parents who looked terrified. And there's like empty syringes and alcohol bottles littering the tracks, and just tons of homeless people walking around in like a drug haze. And a lot of the passengers seem to be at unease. I think some people are just so desensitized that they don't even notice it. But he spoke with a lot of passengers, and instead of saying they wanted less law enforcement presence, like the city seems to believe we want, they stated they actually wanted twice as many officers on the trains. And I want to point out that originally, the LA County Sheriff's Department had the contract with the Metro system for officers to work public transit. And back then, the Metro was a lot safer because unlike LAPD, LA County had a fucking backbone and enforced the laws and didn't allow homeless people to live on the trains or in the Metro stations or camp out in front of the Metro stations. And then in 2017, the contract was given to LAPD, which is why I ended up working shifts on the train, because it started as an overtime detail. And a lot of guys jumped on that, especially because it was initially just a high visibility detail and we weren't supposed to be making any arrests. So it was like an easy overtime gig. But I'm not kidding. Like after a few shifts, for me, the extra money wasn't worth it because the Metro Rail in Los Angeles, and this was in 2017, 2018, was a complete shit show. Crime was rampant. People were constantly flagging us down to take care of a homeless person shooting up on the train or assaulting someone, stealing someone's purse or briefcase or backpack. And I honestly thought it was worse than working Skid Row, which I also did for several years when I was in the mounted unit. So I can't even imagine what it's like now, 5 years later, with the way crime has increased in Los Angeles. So from what I read in this article, back in March, the transit system started playing classical music over the loudspeakers because they hoped that was going to deter people from sleeping on the trains or camping out around the train station, and that it would encourage them to like take their tents and go somewhere else. And then they installed floodlights and the train platforms, hoping that that would keep people away. But according to an article in the San Gabriel Tribune from May 5th, the LA Metro system has drawn up a proposed $9 billion, not million, $9 billion budget to try to increase ridership because there's all these concerns about people from the rising crime, the rampant drug use, and people like urinating and defecating on the trains. So 13.5 million of this will be for homeless outreach for the people who are sleeping on the trains and buses. Another 10 million is going to go towards partnering with the LA County Department of Mental Health. And an additional 1.8 million will be for setting up like short-term shelters. And this budget, by the way, is an increase of 65.6% from last year's budget. They also have a $175.8 million budget for law enforcement contracts and a $23.6 million increase to hire 24 more full-time custodians and 50 temporary cleaning workers to clean the buses and trains while they're in service instead of waiting until the end of the night, because people are obviously complaining about how unsanitary it is when you have homeless people living on the train and it gets dirty and disgusting because there's just like, no, how do you clean that up when they're living there? According to a survey that the Metro took, an average of 800 homeless people are living on the train system in Los Angeles on any given night. Like, how about enforcing city codes? How about reinstituting state laws that prohibit people from doing this shit in the first place? And I want to add that, not very surprisingly, an article came out last week about how LAPD is still having a recruitment problem. A lot of senior guys have retired. Other people, like experienced officers, have left to go work at other departments that actually support their officers, which is what I did. When I was with LAPD, they had a standard of maintaining 10,000 officers. And honestly, a good number of those weren't even on the street because they worked admin positions or they had inside jobs. But according to recent statistics, the department lost nearly 1,000 officers since 2019. And they currently stand at around 9,994 sworn personnel as of this past April. So the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, she wants to increase the department's budget to hire another 400 officers by the end of 2024. And the city has until June 1st to approve it. And who knows if they're going to do that because it's such a progressive city that doesn't like law enforcement. But she wants to allocate $1 million towards recruiting new officers with signing bonuses of up to $15,000, including bringing back retired officers. Stephanie, if you gave me $100,000 bonus, I wouldn't go back.
I don't blame you. I mean, I certainly would not want to be a police officer in today's world, like especially in LA, where I mean, I feel like they're just working against you than supporting you, and there's no respect. And I just think it's crazy that we have all of this happening, like a crime wave, like we haven't seen in a long time, and maybe worse than it's ever been. Yet none of these people will ever admit that their progressive policies fucked their city and state. Like no one's ever going to admit that. And now like they're trying to, get more budgets and this and that. But if the attitude doesn't change and they don't start actually like supporting people, it's just going to keep getting worse, I think, personally. Yeah. And just like LA, the New York subway system is seeing a crime wave that hasn't been this bad since the 1990s. This past week, a 30-year-old man named Jordan Neely died on the subway when a 24-year-old former Marine named Daniel Penny put Neely in a chokehold to subdue him after Neely was harassing subway riders. The city medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, noting Neely died to, quote, compression of neck or chokehold. So Penny, who served in the Marine Corps from 2017 to 2021, was taken into custody, but police ended up releasing him soon after without any charges. And this has become a polarizing issue, with many people pointing to the record levels of crime on public transit and throughout the city, while other people are calling this an act of racism, as Neely was Black and Penny was white. So it's caused protests to erupt in the streets. And so I was really surprised when I heard that New York City Mayor Eric Adams called it irresponsible to determine fault before all the facts were known, because everyone just jumped at, that this guy should be in jail. So he was actually kind of defending him, which really surprised me. But then you have New York Governor Kathy Hochul had a completely different viewpoint on this. when a journalist asked her what the appropriate response should be when someone's acting erratically and threatening people, she deflected, saying, quote, "I think it's a case-by-case situation. This was an unarmed individual who had been on the subway many times, known by many of the regular travelers. And, sometimes people have an episode where they're displaying their feelings in a loud and emotional way. But it became very clear that he was not going to, cause harm to these other people. And the video of the three individuals holding him down until the last breath was snuffed out of him. I would say it was a very extreme response. Okay, she sounds like a kindergarten teacher. He was displaying his feelings, like, come on, and I should point out there were two other men, and I don't think either one of them were white.
One of
They
them
were
was
holding Yeah, they were holding down his arms and legs because the guy was out of control. And so anyhow, of course, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, had to tweet about it because apparently that's all she does in her job is tweet. And she was tweeting about Mayor Adams' response, saying, quote, "This honestly feels like a new low. Not being able to clearly condemn a public murder because the victim was of a social status some would deem too low to care about." So the last sentence is especially rich from an admin trying to cut the very services that could have helped him. Okay, this is rich coming from AOC. She's a New York City congresswoman that hasn't done a damn thing for the people of New York. And I took it upon myself to look up what bills she sponsored, and there's been 23 total. All of them were in 2020, and they all had to do with like COVID, and there were a couple about climate agenda and her Green New Deal. Not one of them was about helping people with mental illness, helping the people of New York City, actually solving the problems that people are facing every day. Not one, not even any of them that she co-sponsored were about that. So she wants to condemn how Neely was a victim of social status that was too low, yet she hasn't done anything to help these people in this low social status, as she calls it. Not a fucking thing. All she does is tweet and run her mouth and then goes after everyone else. So that just like pissed me off because there's no substance there. She's not actually doing anything to solve the problem, just like most of the people in these left-wing liberal cities. So it's important to point out that there were plenty of witnesses that were there. There's video as well that were on the subway while this all happened. And they all confirmed that Neely was repeatedly threatening the well-being of passengers, stating his willingness to hurt anyone, and saying that he was unbothered by the prospect of returning to jail or being killed. So, I mean, that's a scary situation. And most of the time we hear about these incidents happening where no one does anything, like women literally being raped while passengers just sit by and let it happen. But here you have three men that decided to subdue the guy that was threatening passengers. And it's a tragedy that the guy ends up dying. Like it's horrible. But at the same time, like Tara said, we have to look at the root of what's happening here. Like this is not surprising when you look at all of the crime that's been going on in these cities and how the city doesn't want to do anything to stop it. So Penny's attorneys ended up releasing a statement offering condolences while also highlighting the issues being ignored by the city, including tragedies like this one. He wrote, quote, "For too long, those suffering from mental illness have been treated with indifference. We hope that out of this awful tragedy will come a new commitment by our elected officials to address the mental health crisis on our streets and subways. Mr. Neely had a documented history of violent and erratic behavior, the apparent result of ongoing and untreated mental illness. When Mr. Neely began aggressively threatening Daniel Penny and the other passengers, Daniel, with the help of others, acted to protect themselves until help arrived. Daniel never intended to harm Mr. Neely and could not have foreseen his untimely death." So Neely, it turns out, had a criminal record with 44 arrests ranging from assault to disorderly conduct. And a Reddit user posted about the incident with Neely the day prior to his death, saying, quote, "This man jumped on me, grabbed my shoulders, and pushed me toward the tracks Sunday night at this very station." So Healy was a homeless man. He was a Michael Jackson impersonator that hung out by the subway. And it just sounds like, from what we can tell, he was mentally ill and no one did anything about it. And the whole incident was just it was tragic. And according to the New York Post, on Saturday, dozens of demonstrators jumped onto the subway tracks at Lexington Avenue and East 63rd Street, forcing an oncoming Q train to slam on the brakes at the mouth of the tunnel. A journalist, Rebecca Brannon, showed a video of several protesters barricading the car's open doorway so that commuters were forced to stay inside. Like they were not letting people off the subway. And 7 people ended up getting arrested. Overall, in New York City, crime was up 23.5% in 2022, and there were a total of 327 murders. And according to nyc.gov, the overall index crime for January of 2023 compared to January of 2022 was up 4.1%, led by a 14.9% increase in felony assault. And, there were 327 murders. No one did anything. Now there's protests erupting in the streets because of this unfortunate event. Tara, like, do you think this is going to be another repeat of the whole George Floyd protests that went the whole summer of 2020?
Well, it is the beginning of summer 2023, and we are at a very precarious position politically in our country right now. And the conspiracy theory side of me, which is, again, as we've talked about, conspiracy theories end up being true, believes that a lot of this is going to be hyped by the media and promoted, like the whole thing with George Floyd was, to kind of distract us from what other things are going on in our country. And I'm sorry, it's just a fucked position to be in. You're either going to stand up and try to do what's right. And sometimes when you try to do that, unfortunate incidents happen. And I don't think that, from what I read, was it a chokehold or was it a like MMA style submission hold that he did on him?
I watched the video. It looked like a headlock.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know like what the proper term is, but it looked like what we would call a headlock.
And then is it going to come back that Daniel Neely had drugs in his system? Because just like with George Floyd, the amount of drugs in his system clearly contributed to what happened. I'm not saying that having the officer kneel on his neck for a ridiculous amount of time was right, because it wasn't, but he also was on drugs. And so is this incident going to come back where he is on drugs, which may have had an impact on why he died in this position? Like, you're either going to sit by and do nothing and watch innocent people get hurt, or people like these 3 that tried to do something right. And then you find out this guy clearly had a long ass history of criminal conduct. What do we do? I mean, we're in such a shitty position.
Well, that's exactly why you have capable men just sitting there letting women be raped on the subway, because they see what happens. Like, you get involved and now all of a sudden, you're wanted for murder. Like it's just terrible. And now the police are asking for all these witnesses to come back in. Well, no one's going to do that when they see protests everywhere? No one wants to get themselves in that situation. And the whole thing is just unfortunate. But again, just like with George Floyd, it's like, if you weren't committing crimes in the first place, you'd be alive. Right. And I'm not saying you should die. I'm not saying that at all. This is such an unfortunate, tragic event. But at the end of the day, like, if there wasn't all this crime happening, it wouldn't lead to these situations. So I don't know. It's just a shit show. And I think it's going to be a long summer if it's anything like the George Floyd riots.
Oh, absolutely. And like, this is not, relegated to, New York and Los Angeles. Let's take a look at a couple other places. Let's take a look at Portland, Oregon. Like, they're another blue city that has a crime-ridden transportation system. Back in February, there was an article in the LA Times about how homelessness in Portland has increased from 4,000 to over 6,600 people. And because of this, crime has skyrocketed. Oregon has the highest homeless population per capita in the nation and the worst drug rate addiction in the country. So, comparing crime statistics from the past 3 years, according to the Portland Police Bureau, shootings went from 379 in 2019 to 831 in 2020 to over 1,200 in both 2021 and 2022. Homicides climbed over 207% from 2019 to 2022. The number of stolen vehicles shot up from 6,500 in 2019 to over 11,000 in 2022. And these stats are apparently higher than San Francisco, Atlanta, and Minneapolis. And those are all blue crime havens as well. And so, similar to Los Angeles and New York, the increase in homelessness and crime has impacted the city's public transportation system. According to a local Portland news station, KOIN, there has been a surge in crime on the TriMet transit system, with both passengers and TriMet operators being assaulted. Back in January, a 25-year-old male on fentanyl and marijuana attacked a 78-year-old man who was waiting on the train platform. And this is fucking brutal, but I'm going to read it anyway. When the police arrived, the suspect, identified as Corin Kramer, was still on top of the old man, gnawing on his face. And
Oh my God.
according to the police report, the suspect had chewed off the victim's ear and part of his face, and the injury was so severe that responders could see the victim's skull. And then earlier, in just a few weeks before that, a local homeless woman, identified as 32-year-old Brianna Lace Workman, pushed a 3-year-old child onto the tracks, and the child landed face first on the metal rail and on the rocks below. And thank God there wasn't a train coming, because they were able to rescue her. But witnesses said that this woman just did this unprovoked. In February, a woman stabbed a TriMet bus driver, and he barely was able to escape through the window of the bus. And then back in November, there was another publicized incident where a woman assaulted both passengers and a TriMet supervisor. And these are only the incidents that are being highly publicized. So according to an article in OPB News, which is an Oregon news outlet, things got so bad in December that the TriMet board of directors had to adopt a new ordinance, Stephanie, a new ordinance to, quote, make propelling bodily fluids at TriMet employees a serious physical offense.
Oh my, you've got to be kidding.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So how many times did employees have to be urinated on or literally have shit thrown at them for this to become an actual ordinance? And what's the punishment for this? Long-term exclusion from the train.
Okay, no job is worth having propelling bodily fluids on you.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. Oh my God.
And then this is the kind of shit that also blows my mind, because it's so ass backwards. In order to increase safety, TriMet has also started prohibiting police from checking fares, because fare evasion shouldn't be a crime. And so this problem has escalated to the point where the TriMet union, ATU 757, met with the Multnomah County District Attorney to figure out how to curb crime and increase prosecution for criminal activity. And there's all this ongoing investigation going on right now about how they're not prosecuting crimes. Well, nobody in blue cities are prosecuting crimes. And so the union president, Shirley Block, told Coin6 that the entire community is being impacted by the fact that all of this crime in transit is being allowed to go on, and that too few people are being held accountable. And then let's take a look at another crime-ridden blue city with transit issues, and that's Minneapolis. There was an article in New Geography from November of last year that stated, according to federal data, people who decide to step on the light rail in the Twin Cities are at more risk for being injured by an assailant than any other light rail system in America. And this revelation is supported by facts, because the federal law requires that the Federal Transit Administration maintains a national transit database so that they can support planning efforts and do these multi-year analysis trends. And this article stated that part of the data collection includes tracking assaults, homicides, robbery, theft, rape, vehicle theft, and suicide. And based on comparing statistics across America's 22 light rail systems, Metro Transit in Minneapolis accounts for 40% of the crimes that are occurring on light rail systems throughout the country, even though they only carry 4% of passenger miles. And then, according to an article in NPR News from March, the Twin Cities Metro Transit System has become a haven for crime, addiction, and homelessness. The article stated, quote, "People are sleeping and living on transit. Floors are often littered with food containers, syringes, and empty liquor bottles. Reported crimes were up 54% in 2022 from 2021, driven largely by an increase in narcotics and weapons violations, and it's not uncommon to see people openly using drugs on the light rail trains." There's also been an increase in insults. You had assaults. You had 2 people that were shot and killed at a downtown St. Paul station in December of last year, and bus drivers have reported being punched and threatened with a gun. So I did a little bit of background on the rise in crime in, this metro area. And according to the Star Tribune, which is a local Minneapolis news outlet, narcotics incidents went up by 182%. Weapons incidents went up by 145%, and alcohol violations went up by 92%. And again, this is just on the public transportation system. A more recent news article in an outlet called The American Experiment that just came out on May 5th stated that the latest crime stats show that serious crime on the metro, light rail, and bus lines in Minneapolis has shot up 2/3 from 817 crimes in 2022 to already over 1,350 in March of this year. We are only a few months into those 3 months into the year. So what has the city done to combat this problem? Well, apparently last year, towards the end of the year, they launched a 40-point public transit safety plan calling for more police officers, private security, and then a focus on transit stations to serve as a hub for drug addicts, vagrants, and criminals. And they also tried reducing the number of rail cars being deployed on 2 of their bus lines from train lines, from 3 cars to 2 cars, because they hoped that would discourage people from, quote, unwanted behavior, but it didn't make a difference. And according to Metro Transit Police Chief Ernest Morales III, who, by the way, has apparently spent the last few months riding trains and buses all over the city to try to figure out what to do about this problem, he said that Metro Transit is a major transportation system that has become an unofficial homeless shelter. And because there are no turnstiles to discourage fare evasion, they've seen basically a flood of what he called chemically dependent people. So basically rampant drug use and homelessness in the train station. Metro Transit has been trying to hire more police officers, but surprise, surprise, they can't find suitable candidates. I wonder why. As of March, the Axios Twin Cities reported that the transit system was authorized to have 171 full-time officers, but at that time they only had 107, despite the fact that they gave officers a fairly significant pay raise. They also authorized 70 community service officer positions, which I guess are like unarmed police officers in training who ride the trains and buses, and they help out passengers and assist the police. But this article that I read, which was published in January, at that time, they only had 12 of the 70 positions filled because nobody wants to do this fucking job. And they expanded their video surveillance system so that officers could track and apprehend suspects more quickly, but it doesn't seem to be deterring anyone from violent crime. And so the bottom line is, once again, like, all of these issues, I mean, we could go on and cite like 12 other cities that are having significant problems like this. And the bottom line is all of them are in areas where there is no enforcement, where there's no prosecution, and nobody is addressing the underlying problem of the mental health crisis in this country that is the root cause of all of these issues: mental health and drug use. And you could throw trillions of dollars at this problem, but unless you're actually doing something to fix it, it's not going to make a fucking difference.
Well, and the progressive policies, like, it's 2023.
Yes.
They started this shit in 2020. Just look around any blue city where they're spending our tax dollars to sit around and talk about using the correct pronouns instead of talking about keeping their city safe, this is the result. This is what happens. You're not seeing this in red cities where there's more conservative policies. Like, clearly these policies are not working. It's been 3 years. I get that they're never going to admit they're wrong, but maybe just go back to what you had before as a starting point, because this is not working and it's just going to keep getting worse. And that's why people are leaving in record numbers and moving to red states. They don't want to raise their families around drug addicts. They don't want to take their kid to a park and there's syringes, or ride public transportation and they get assaulted. And it's a shame, but they've done this to themselves. These cities are wrecking themselves, and it doesn't look like anyone wants to take accountability and admit that there's a problem that they caused. So we're probably going to have many more episodes like this until they change that.
Yeah. And, there's this constant fallback to, oh, it was the pandemic. The pandemic is the reason why public transportation slowed. That's bullshit. It's all about safety and crime. And there are so many people that have no choice but to ride public transit because they don't have vehicles and they have to get to work. And you are subjecting hardworking people to basically being assaulted on a daily basis, or taking the risk of being assaulted or worse, murdered on public transportation, because these cities cannot enforce the law and actually create safe transportation.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And it is a shame. And I wish that I had some hope that it would change in the near future, but it looks like people are they keep voting in the same politicians with the same crazy progressive policies. And so I'm sorry, but you're getting what you wanted. Like, this is what the result is of having those policies in place, because it's not been this bad before and it's not this way in red states. So explain that to me, someone. So yeah, we'll keep everyone posted. I hope that the New York case does not turn into this like whole entire summer of riots, but we'll keep everyone posted on what the outcome of that is. And hopefully we won't have a horrible crime wave in the summer. But like I said, I think it's going to continue for quite some time. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here for Freedom Friday. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you get our latest episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you could, please rate and review the show. We are going to be reading every single review, and I would love it if you hopped over to Instagram at Unapologetically Outspoken and say hi. We want to see who's out there and start a conversation, plus get all of the topics that you want us to talk about next. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.